Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 111 of the Midweek Bible Study. It's good to have you here. Hope that everything is going well. Hope things are going good your way, and we appreciate you stopping by here for this Bible study tonight. We always want to. It's always a good thing to whether you're in the same place or whether you are together virtually. It's always good to be together and to study the Word of God. Tonight is going to be a shorter episode than usual. We had a guest lined up for tonight, but something came up last minute, and so he was unable to be here tonight. And so we're just going to take a look at a few things, and we'll wait for next week to get a full lesson in. But we do want to extend you an invitation if you're someone who is in the Portia area. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. If you're in the area, hope you can join us for one of those times. We would love to see you, love to hear from you, and we're having some good classes. I know on a Sunday we're studying through the book of Isaiah. On Wednesday we're studying through the book of Matthew, and so there's some Old Testament and some New Testament. There's value everywhere you go in the Word of God. That's how I always say you can learn something no matter where you study the Bible. Whether you go into the farthest reaches of Leviticus and Numbers and the minor prophets, you can still learn something really good from there. Or if you go to the Sermon on the Mount or some of those famous passages, certainly the crucifixion of Jesus, you can learn so much from those things. And whether big or small, the Bible is something that we can learn from. And so it's always good in order to take a look at that. Let's see what else we got going on. If you got any suggestions or any questions about what we studied tonight, please feel free to send those in, and we would love to talk to you, love to fill you in. We don't want any misunderstandings or such, and so know that you have that available to you as well. But other than that, I think we will get started here tonight. Like I said, this is probably going to be a shorter one, but I think we're still going to take a look at some good things. It's good to have the Dunlaps here with us. I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you had a wonderful day, and we always appreciate you guys stopping by. But we're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now this is, of course, the 111th episode, of this particular, study. And so I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at one of my kind of favorite passages. It's really, really short, but it's a rule that sometimes I kind of go by, the 1 Corinthians 11:1 rule, which says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Which is the advice that Paul gives to the Corinthians. He says to imitate me just as I am of Christ. We know that Paul was someone who, if you're going to imitate someone, Paul would be a pretty good example for that. He's someone that would people look up to even today for what he did, because with all that he did, with all of the evangelism that he did, and with all of the planting of the churches and the mighty works and all those great things that we hear about Paul doing, he's a great person to look up to. But even Paul here, he says, be imitators of me, but not just because I'm such a good guy, or not just because I'm such a wonderful person in this world, but be an imitator of me as I am of Christ. Paul was, and there's a couple of things we can get from this very, very short verse. And of course, this kind of comes after what we read in 1 Corinthians, the end of chapter 10. If you read that. But he says, to be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So the first thing is that Paul, even though as good as Paul was, he knew that goodness was not something of his own doing. That the goodness of his character wasn't something that he kind of contrived of his own will, but he was following someone as well. And another thing, it highlights the power that an example can be, the power that an influential person can be. And thirdly, it's something I think that highlights what is the true example to follow. And that, of course, is Christ. Someone like Paul wasn't going to follow just anybody. He wasn't just going to follow a random person, but it had to be someone special. And he only followed the best. And this, of course, was going to be, the one that he saw on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9. Jesus Christ himself. And so this is something that I know that this verse kind of always sticks in my mind when I think of some of those quick little verses that have some power to them. This is one that kind of sticks in my mind. And you always say, it's 1 Corinthians 11:1. So there's 3 ones in that in the designation for this passage. And so, as the old saying goes, if you want to be number 1, then follow 1 Corinthians 11:1, which of course says this: be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And so Paul, Paul was someone who always wanted to be the best at what he did. He was someone who, when he was persecuting Christians, he didn't just do it halfway, but kind of similar to Peter. He was someone that would do it to the best of his ability, go as far as he could with it. Paul was someone who was dedicated to that. And so when it came to being a Christian, and when it came to being someone that was preaching the gospel, that same thing applied. He still wanted to be the best at what he did. And he knew that the only way that he could do that was to follow Christ. And so the first thing, like I said, that we can look at is that Paul knew that he wasn't enough, that his own initiative wasn't enough in order to be a perfect example. Paul was pretty good. He was someone that, like I said, if you think about the Christians that had a big impact on this world, Paul is up there, pretty high. But even he realized that wasn't enough. There's many examples of people throughout the scriptures that thought that they were all there was. They thought that they had everything made. They thought that they were, they had everything they needed in order to be, successful. They knew that they, kind of maybe either it was, pride or ever it was something else that filled them, but they thought that they had all the answers, or that they were the answer to many things. And most of the time they were punished for that. Most of the time that type of mentality did not, end well. And a lot of times people suffered greatly. You think of people like Herod. You think of others throughout the Bible story that kind of put themselves on a pedestal and kind of thought that they were the best thing to follow. Paul probably had a better claim at that than maybe anyone else in the scriptures, and yet he said, "I'm an imitator of Christ. If you're going to follow me, you can do that, but just know I'm following Christ." And so if we adopt that same mentality, we can know that we can be a good example. We can be a good influence. We can be someone that can encourage good things from people, draw out the best side of people. But we also always realize that we're following that example as well. We're following Christ in what we do. It's something that an example that he did and that he put forth that we can follow as ourselves. We know that Christ was someone who came to this earth. He experienced all the things that we experience. He experienced hunger. He experienced pain and loneliness. He experienced temptation. He experienced all these things so that he can relate to what we go through on this earth. And when he went through those things, he remained perfect. And he handled all situations with wisdom and with integrity. It doesn't mean that he wasn't always. He had some fiery moments, that's for sure. Jesus definitely had some fiery moments, in his ministry, but he was someone, that always, kept the big picture, in mind, and that's a good attitude for us to have. We be that good example, but we always point towards Christ with what we do, and not only with what we do, but with what we say, and our attitude towards that, because we know that if you follow Christ, you can't go wrong. Christ is never going to lead you astray. He's never going to lead you down a bad road, but he's going to be there for you. He's going to lead you to where you need to be. And so Paul knew that his own integrity, his own character wasn't enough. He had to imitate the best. And secondly, we could see that as we kind of mentioned before, that Jesus is that ultimate example. He is that example that we can follow, and there's nothing that can substitute it. There's nothing that can be better than Jesus, but he's the only one that we can look to as the solution and as the one who was able to conquer these obstacles that came up in his way. And we know that we go through some tough things. As people who live through this life, we go through pain. We go through loss. We go through frustration. We go through anxiety. We go through a lot of these things in life, and sometimes it's not easy. But Jesus is not someone who is sitting up there without a clue of what it's like to live on this earth, and telling us to live up to the standard of being a Christian. He's not someone who doesn't understand what we go through, but he went through those exact things, and oftentimes to an extreme amount. I mean, the pain that he felt during the crucifixion, hopefully, with the probability none of us are ever going to be crucified. We're never going to be executed in that manner. But Jesus was, and he was tortured, and he had his people betray him. He dealt with all these things, And so Jesus understands the hardship of life. And so we can trust that when he tells us that we can do this, when he tells us we can live up to this standard, we can do it because Jesus, he understands. And so be imitators of me, as I am of Christ. There is a need, for following. We know there being a Christian is not about just getting through this life all on your own, but we have to look to something. We have to follow something. You have to be someone who is willing to go to the source, to get what we need, to get the truth, and that's something that's very important. As we said, this follows on the heels of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, that where he talks about doing all things for the glory of God, and he ends the section in verses 31 and 32. And a lot of this is reference to eating meat that's offered to idols, which is a big problem during their day. But in verse 31, he says, "So whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved." Paul here is saying that there's a lot of things that we can do, but we should always do all things for the glory of God. We should consider our faith in everything that we do, because there's some things that we can do that that won't glorify God in that manner. And that's it could be another topic that we could take a look at, in depth, at some time. What does it mean to live to the glory of God? What does it mean to, live to his glory in that manner? But it's definitely something that as a Christian, it's a perspective of life, that we have to look at, to do all things for his glory, and not to, give offense to people, but to be someone who considers others, when we do our actions. In the sections, up in verses 23, and following, he talks about, how all things are lawful, but not all things, are helpful. Sometimes you can do something that isn't contrary to the will of God, but yet it may be harmful to someone. It may be a bad influence. It may be a bad example for someone else. And as we looked at with 1 Corinthians 11:1, if we are imitators of Christ, that means that we accept that we have that influence. We have that example that we give out. You may think that nobody really looks up to you, that nobody really counts your influence as something that is valuable, but I would contend that you probably are unaware of some of the people that look up to you or are encouraged by what you do, because there's a person doesn't have to come up to you and say, you encouraged me, or I look up to you, in order for that to actually happen. There's a lot of people that I look up to and that I've been encouraged by, that I've never really came out right and came up to them and told them that I could probably do a lot better at that. I could probably be someone who was a lot better at letting people know that. But you have your sphere of influence is oftentimes a whole lot bigger than you think. And so for someone who considers others, when we do these things, then it's something that's going to benefit us a lot, because we could all use good examples to look up to. Even people who have been Christians for a very long time, they need good examples to look to. They need people to go to when they have questions. They need people to be encouraged by, to be inspired by. Those are things that are necessary in order to get through this life, and to remain faithful. And so it's something we have to consider. Are we imitating Christ? The questions are that we can consider. Are we imitating Christ? Are we someone who is committed to having a good example? Do we consider others, with the things, that we do? And, are we someone that is humble enough in order to make that known? Other questions that we can ask ourselves, and I think they can maybe all of those could be worthy of a more in-depth, look. But this is just a look here at a 1 Corinthians, 11 and verse 1. It's good to have Kathy here. It's good to see you. Hope everything is going well on your end. Always good to see you drop by here. But this is actually, as we said, at the beginning, this was going to be a shorter episode because we originally had a guest scheduled for tonight, but he had to back out. He had to back out, and he had something come up, with on his end, and so we'll reschedule him for another time. But I hope this is something that has been beneficial to you, and as I always say with 1 Corinthians 11:1. This is, of course, the 111th episode, so I thought this would be good to look at this verse. But if you want to be number one, follow 1 Corinthians 11:1. Be imitators of me, as I am, of Christ. And so, hope this has been good for you. Hope that you will, this has benefited you, in some way. We'll be back here next Thursday for another episode. We'll have Farrell Nicholson from the Agnes Church of Christ. He's going to be here with us next week. You'll enjoy what he has to say. He's a good preacher of the gospel. I know him. I know him even going back to Mammoth Spring. But hope that you have like I said, a wonderful night, and we'll look forward to our future Bible studies and see what we have in store in the future. But until then, I hope that you can glorify God in all that you do. Hope you can be that good example, and we will catch you next time.